Hey guys, it's Brigitte with San Diego Seed Company, and I'm super excited to be in my garden after 3, 4, 5 days of rain. It's been a fabulous rain event here in Southern California, and I want to talk a little bit about what rain means for your garden, especially if you live in Southern California or Zone 9 and 10 in an area that doesn't get a lot of rain. What does rain look like? How can you prep for it? And what are some tips we have for you? But before I get into that, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button if you want to be notified anytime we do a video. So let's jump into it. So you can tell that the garden is super wet. This is my favorite time to be in the garden, is after a rain. The plants just look so happy, especially for us because we live in a region that sometimes we get less than 10 inches of rain in a year. And that's not a lot of water to sustain lush, beautiful plants. In fact, it's funny because when I first moved to California, I thought, wow, this place is so green, it's so lush. Well, it's only so green and so lush because of irrigation, because lawns and landscapes, they're artificially fed water. It's not from rain that naturally falls from the sky. We simply don't get enough. In fact, San Diego County is a semi-arid county, meaning that we're pretty close to being a desert sometimes. So keep that in mind when you're a gardener, especially if you're a transplant gardener. If you're gardening in San Diego, but you are from the Midwest or the East Coast, you'll notice that it is drastically different. So keep that in mind. For us, when it rains, it is one of the most exciting times in the garden or on the farm, and we do everything we can to try to capture as much water in the soil as possible, and for several reasons. One, because it doesn't rain here very often, when it does rain, we get a lot of wash off. We get mulch that gets washed off of our rows. You'll notice that there's a lot of flooding that can happen. That's because really dry soil has a hard time sucking up moisture. And you'll know this from our other videos when we talk about seed starting and we talk about how seed starting mix is hydrophobic, meaning really, really dry soil has a hard time holding on to water molecules. So it is our job before it rains to ensure that we can capture as much water in the garden as possible. So how do we do that? There's a couple different things you can do. Right before it rains, it's always a good idea to, one, turn off your irrigation. Don't waste any water if you don't have to. Two, I like to go through, and you can tell we use a lot of mulch in the garden. So what I do is I simply come in with a rake and I will actually move the mulch off of my main rows to make sure that nothing is impeding water soaking into that ground. You also can break up the soil lightly with perhaps like a pitchfork, something very simple. In fact, I've got one here and I'll show you what that looks like. So you might just take a pitchfork, or you can use a broad fork, and you can go in, and all I'm doing is simply cracking open the soil. That's it. Nothing excessive. It does two different things. One, I'm making these nice little holes where moisture and air can get down into the ground. Two, I'm breaking up soil compaction. Now, I want to tell you this with a word of caution, because there is a big difference between using a pitchfork or a broad fork to break open the soil and tilling the soil when it is this wet or before a rain. Before a rain, you want to make sure you don't overwork the soil, because that can lead to moisture not getting in, and then actually as it rains, it will lead to more soil compaction. Let's think about why that is. As water is hitting the ground, the smaller particles are going to move to the top of the surface and the larger particles are going to move down, and that's how you get soil compaction. Well guys, thank God for my videographer whose dad is a science teacher, because I totally got something wrong, which I knew, but what is it? How does it go? You want to tell us?
The small particles go to the bottom, the big particles go to the top.
Which I knew that, but on camera it's nerve-wracking.
All right, let's get back to it.
You do want to work the soil lightly, ever so gently, but it is a fabulous idea. You can tell here, it's been raining for the last 4 or 5 days. You can tell that the soil is already very soft, very fluffy. I don't have a lot of soil compaction, and that's partly because that's in my area that I'm planting and not in my walkway. If I were to do this in my walkway, it would be a lot more compact. So you want to do that. And then also in between rains or after it's rained a lot, you want to weed. that is the best time to be in the garden weeding. One, because it's cool and it feels amazing, and also because the weeds are gonna come up very easily. You can see that these weeds are just popping up. I can get the roots, all of them, because the soil is nice and moist. And you know, one of the cool things about being in the garden after a rainstorm, especially in our seed garden, is all of a sudden you see all of this life sprout up. You will see little seedlings everywhere because it's seeds that have fallen from the plants that we've done seed production of. So it's a wonderful time to be in the garden, but take advantage so that you can do the things you need to do to get the most moisture in the ground before the rainstorm is over. Okay, so one of the things that people are concerned about when it does rain here in Southern California is what's gonna happen to my plants. You can see here, we've got a little bit of damage. We've got some larger plants that have been pushed down from the rain. Now, this is not a big deal because these plants are big, they're robust, and they're healthy. And that's actually part of what makes them fall over more easily is because they're so big and they're heavy. Rain hits them, a lot of weight, they get pulled down. I'm just gonna leave these plants be until all of the rainstorms are done, and then I can prop them up if needed. But a lot of times what you'll see is the plants will on their own gently start pulling themselves back up. This guy is a little too heavy. He might need a little bit of help, but overall, he's perfectly fine. He's still rooted, so that's important to remember. Now, one area in your garden where rain can really do some damage is if you have baby starts outside. Unfortunately, I've been the victim of this many a times, and new gardeners typically are because they think, oh, it's raining, I will leave my baby plants outside, but they don't realize how damaging one little drop, you know, a drop of rain this big can really be damaging to a start that is this big. And so you get washout, you get plants that can't bounce back from the rainfall, they're saturated. A lot of different damages can happen to your baby plants if you leave them outside. So if we're expecting to get anything more than a drizzle, bring your baby starts into a safe place. They don't have to necessarily be inside, but maybe even just under an awning or an umbrella so that they're safe from wind and large raindrops. So if you have a plant that falls over and you really don't think that it will recuperate, just harvest it. Maybe it's a sign, maybe the roots are not as deep as they should be, and it's time to take it out, enjoy it, then let that ground soak up lots of water for your future planting. Okay, so the other thing that we do before a rainstorm, and this is primarily my husband's job and he loves it, he goes around and he checks all of our rain barrels. Because these rain barrels can fill up in the matter of minutes during a moderate to light rainstorm. If we get heavy rain, this will fill up instantly. And so he goes around, he uses these hoses, and we actually gravity feed, and we will deep water a lot of our palm trees or other plants, ornamental plants on the property that are not as important to us as our vegetables, and we'll empty them so that they can fill up in the next rainstorm. It's also important to check any of your overflow hoses to make sure they're not blocked with anything. The first rainstorm of the year, this was actually blocked because some animal had come and buried into here and made a little nest, and so this was not overflowing. So we had massive amounts of water that was just flowing right here. Luckily, it didn't get into the garage. But it's important to check everything and make sure that when it overflows, which it will, especially a barrel this small, the water has somewhere to go. We usually let the water overflow into the garden and onto our mango tree. You can see how happy it is. But if we really need to move water excessively, we can actually just put this right down the driveway. Oops, sorry. Sorry. I was off of the camera. No matter where you are in the United States, if you're in an area that gets lots of rain or you're in an area that gets very little rain, you have to remember that before irrigation, before electricity, rain was the farmers' most important thing that they needed to grow their crops. And we still have that reverence for rain today, especially because we're in a semi-arid climate. So before you get a rainstorm, make sure you go check on your plants, do what you need to do to make sure that that rainstorm can be as beneficial to your garden as possible.